Let's move over to Fayetteville, Arkansas, where the Bengal Tigers of LSU, they control 34-10. They're the winners in this one. Caden Durham is the story in this one. Garrett Nussmeier doesn't have to do it all. And I think that's really important for LSU. So I quickly want to talk about this one because LSU, alongside of Texas A&M, who won really tight. It was a tight game with Mississippi State here for a while, which Mississippi State, kudos to those guys. The three biggest games that they've played this year in the SEC, Texas, Georgia, and now Texas A&M, they've been in the game all three times. I don't think they ever really had a chance of winning any of those three games, but they've played really, really tough. And here for LSU, those are the two teams on top of the SEC right now. Texas has a loss. Georgia has a loss. Alabama has two losses. Tennessee has a loss. Outside of that, it's LSU and A&M. And the Tigers, they finally do it with a rushing attack. Caden Durham has been steady, not super explosive necessarily, but he gets to that 100-yard mark, just barely, 101 yards here for him. But he also gets to the end zone three different times. Taylor Green is pretty effectively held in check. LSU, I think they're finding their legs, not just on offense, but on defense, more importantly.
Yeah, look, I thought that win last week was going to be a springboard for Nussmeier, and I agree with you. He didn't get the touchdowns. He wasn't asked to do a ton. Thought he was efficient, though. 23 completions in 34 attempts.
But it's good that it's not just him.
Yeah, no, I agree. And they've been asking, they've been begging that Caden Durham takes over that role ever since they lost down 2 or 3 starting running backs before him. And he was held in check a little bit last week, but got back off and going this week. And I think you're still going to see more development in that pass game for Nussmeier. But you're right. This is a defense that forced 3 turnovers, an interception, and 2 fumble recoveries. Was all over Taylor Green for the majority of this game, and didn't allow any rushing. They were very good on the ground defensively against the run for Arkansas. And so you're just starting to build. And it's just one of those things where I don't think they're necessarily the best team in the country. They're the team that's like, they could get hot. They could randomly get hot. And we've seen LSU a couple times like randomly get hot. Obviously with Joe Burrow, offensively, they got hot. Even with Jaden Daniels a couple of years ago, offensively, they got hot. I don't know if we're going that far, but just their overall talent doesn't feel like it, but they still somehow seem dangerous. So I am keeping my eye on them, but obviously they got a real gut check game coming next week on the road against Texas A&M. If they're able to go into Kyle Field and win that game, and I know we'll talk about that game when we do our preview show for week 9 in a couple of days. But that's going to be a real like eye opener if they're able to go into Kyle Field and win that game. That says, hey, Georgia, hey, Texas, hey, Tennessee, like you might need to take LSU a little bit more seriously than you have. I still think they're flying under the radar despite being in the top 10. It does feel that way. A win next week changes that though.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's a gut check game. That's a great way to call it. It's a great term for it. And I think that's going to be critical for LSU, not just in just the perception of this team, because I know we talked off air when we were doing college football game time on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game in Atlanta. We were just sort of discussing the fact that this team is flying under the radar and they have the one top 10 win. That's really their only marquee win of the season. I understand you control Arkansas. You do it with defense. More importantly, 38 yards rushing or so. They're held under the 50-yard mark on the ground, which is awesome for this LSU front. And outside of, but you look down the schedule, you got Ole Miss. That was the 3-point win. I feel like you were on to something when you called that, when you said it was a springboard game. I think that was really the best way to look at it because they start the season off with the loss to USC. There was a potential that this season could get ugly, but you survive on the road in Columbia against South Carolina. You control a not very good UCLA team. And then you just start building and building and building. And the important thing with college football, especially in this day and age, is it's not how you start, it's how you finish. If you improve steadily throughout the course of a season, they're going to give themselves an opportunity to play for an SEC championship and potentially jump into the college football playoff. They're in the discussion right now. They're firmly, squarely rooted inside of the discussion. But the thing is, your next 2 games, You're going to learn everything that you need to know against LSU about LSU. You got the win against Ole Miss. That's big. That's big. And I'm not trying to undersell that. But if you go on the road and you get a win at Texas A&M, then you defend home field and you beat Alabama. Okay, check. You're in. Like that. You're firmly in the driver's seat of the Southeastern Conference at that point, because then it's Florida, Vandy, and Oklahoma to finish the season. Three teams who I feel like at that point are really going to be scuffling. No offense to Vanderbilt, the juggernaut giant killers, but look, Oklahoma's reeling. Florida, I mean, they had a huge win. I will say they seem very hot and cold, but we'll see. Florida will be in the midst of the brutal November stretch that a lot of people spent a lot of oxygen discussing over the course of the offseason. But LSU, they got a gut check coming. And I think if they can pass those tests, they will buy themselves a ticket. They will punch their ticket to the college football playoff. If they just win each of their next 2 games, I don't know how many losses they would end the season with, but you win each of the next 2 weeks, you're pretty much in. You're pretty much in at that point. But LSU, I had a lot of questions, and they're slowly being answered, and that's really the important thing.